All right, let's dive into World War II. Um, we had a listener request for a sort of beginner-friendly look at the whole thing, especially Hitler's role in it.
It's a lot to unpack.
Definitely a heavy topic.
Huh.
I think our goal here is to give a clear, informative exploration, keeping in mind the gravity of the subject.
Right, of course.
We thought to kind of make things easier to grasp, we'd follow this thread of how Hitler's ambition, his ideology, actually led to this global conflict. We'll focus on some of those key events and figures.
Sounds good. When we talk about World War II, it's fascinating how it all traces back to the very thing meant to prevent it, the Treaty of Versailles.
You mean the treaty that ended World War I?
Exactly.
Those terms were pretty harsh on Germany, weren't they?
They were. But it wasn't just about being harsh. The treaty had these clauses that, well, some argued they created the perfect breeding ground for extremism. Take Article 231, the war guilt clause,
Yeah, I've heard of that.
It pinned the entire blame for the war on Germany.
A lot of Germans felt that was really unjust.
Huge humiliation.
So even if the goal was peace, maybe the treaty accidentally made things worse. That caused more resentment.
Yeah, precisely. That discontent, plus the economic struggles caused by those reparations, it was like a vacuum, someone like Hitler could step right into.
He was really good at tapping into that feeling, that national humiliation.
Well, absolutely. He was a master at it, promised to bring back German pride and, overturn all those injustices from Versailles.
I bet he talked about the treaty a lot in his speeches.
Constantly. One thing he kept bringing up was this stab-in-the-back myth. The idea that Germany didn't really lose the war, they were betrayed from within.
By who?
Liberals, Jews, anyone he wanted to paint as an enemy.
So not just solutions, but also scapegoating.
It's dangerous stuff, and this is where that Nazi ideology really starts to take hold. It's more than just national pride. It's built on racism, especially anti-Semitism.
So this idea of German superiority, that was the core of it all.
Absolutely, and you have to understand, Hitler was a master propagandist. He knew how to use symbols, how to speak to really get to people. He combined all this hateful stuff with promises of, economic recovery, a strong military. It was a powerful message.
Yeah, especially for a population that was desperate.
Exactly. Desperate for change.
Yeah.
And the really scary thing is, he didn't just talk, he acted. He completely ignored the Treaty of Versailles, rebuilt the military, remilitarized the Rhineland. Then in 1938, he just annexes Austria.
No one stopped him.
Well, there was concern, but a lot of world leaders, they went with this policy of appeasement, figured if they gave him some of what he wanted, they could avoid another war.
But wouldn't that make him bolder? Didn't they see he was just taking advantage?
It's a tough one. Historians still debate it. Some say appeasement was maybe the only option they had. Others say it just delayed the inevitable.
So even with all the warning signs, the world just sleepwalked into war.
Pretty much. And that turning point, the moment when appeasement failed, was the invasion of Poland, September 1939.
What made that such a crucial moment?
It was more than just land grabbing. It was a calculated move showing the world that Hitler wouldn't play by the rules. He was going to redraw the map of Europe, and Poland was just the first.
So that's when everyone finally said, enough.
Yep. Britain, France, they had treaties with Poland. They declared war on Germany.
The official start of World War II.
It is.
Amazing how one man's actions could lead to something so catastrophic.
From the ashes of one war.
The seeds of another, yeah.
As the war went global, it pulled in so many countries. It's really a tangled web of alliances. You had the Axis powers, of course, Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan.
It's like each of them have their own goals, right? Makes it even more complicated. Did their plans even line up? Or were they kind of doing their own thing?
Well, it's both. They had a shared enemy in the Allies, sure, but their aims weren't always perfectly in sync, I guess. Hitler, he was fixated on dominating Europe, that whole vision of a greater German Reich, racially pure and all that.
Right.
Mussolini, though, he wanted to kind of revive the Roman Empire, had his sights set on North Africa, the Mediterranean.
So while Hitler's looking east, Mussolini's going south. What about Japan? What was their play?
They were all about Asia, the Pacific, needed those resources, wanted to be top dog in the region. called it the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere.
Oh, prosperity. That's
Bit of a mess, right?
not.
Really just wanted imperial control.
So each axis power with their own agenda, but they also had this shared enemy in the Allies. Who are the major players on that side?
Oh, the Allies were a mixed bag, that's for sure. You had Great Britain, Winston Churchill at the helm. He was amazing at rallying the British people, stood strong against the Nazis.
Right.
Then there's the Soviet Union, Stalin running things, brutal dictatorship. They joined in 41 after Hitler, well, betrayed them, invaded.
And of course, the U.S. joins later.
Right, under President Roosevelt, after Pearl Harbor.
It's wild, isn't it? These countries, totally different systems, ideologies, but they come together to fight this common enemy.
Oh, the threat was just that big. They knew if Hitler wasn't stopped, it was, well, a dark age for the whole world.
Yeah, the stakes were incredibly high. We have to talk about the Holocaust. You mentioned anti-Semitism being at the heart of Nazi ideology.
Yeah.
How did that play out in the war?
It's the genocide of millions. Jews, other minorities, anyone the Nazis decided was undesirable, rounding up families, deportations, the concentration camps, the whole horrific thing.
It's almost too much to grasp the scale of it. What actually happened in these camps?
It was mass murder, plain and simple. Worked to death, starved, these awful medical experiments, or just executed. They had these industrialized ways of killing, gas chambers, thousands at a time.
Were all the camps the same?
No, they had different purposes. Some were mainly for labor, prisoners working for the German war machine. Others, like Auschwitz-Birkenau, those were built for extermination.
It's a horrifying reminder of what humans are capable of. How did the world even begin to understand this after the war?
Took a long time. Many just couldn't believe it, the sheer scale of it. Even those who saw it firsthand. It was too much to comprehend.
How could this happen? Was there no one to stop it?
People ask that all the time. Some individuals, some groups, they did risk their lives to save Jews. But the Nazi system, it was just so huge, so efficient. And sadly, a lot of people looked away out of fear, maybe, or indifference.
It's a reminder that we have to speak out against injustice. Always. Even when things are at their worst. Changing gears a bit, the war went on for years, battles all over the world. Can you talk about some of the turning points, the ones that gave the Allies the edge?
Sure. Plenty of the battles had a big impact, but some stand out. The Battle of Britain, for one, 1940, in the skies over England.
The RAF, they were outnumbered, but they just kept fighting.
Yeah, against the Luftwaffe. Crucial win for the Allies. It showed Hitler could be stopped, and it really hurt the Luftwaffe, losses they never fully recovered from.
It must have been terrifying, living through the Blitz.
Oh, absolutely. Constant threat of air raids, never knowing when the bombs would fall. The British people, they were amazing, so resilient.
So that win kept England from being invaded by the Nazis.
Absolutely. If the Luftwaffe had controlled the skies, invasion would have been much more likely. But Britain held on, stayed a vital base for the Allies.
So that's one turning point in the West. What about the Eastern Front? Didn't things go very badly for the Germans there?
Oh, yeah. That's where the war was really decided, to be honest. The scale of the fighting, the brutality, nothing like it in the West. The Battle of Stalingrad, that's a prime example.
One of the bloodiest battles ever.
Yeah.
Right? What made Stalingrad so important?
Key city, industrial center, right on the Volga River. Hitler, he thought taking it was crucial for conquering the Soviets. The battle went on and on, months of just ferocious fighting. The city was obliterated.
Must have been horrific for everyone involved.
Beyond horrific. Hand-to-hand combat in the rubble of what was once a city. The losses on both sides just staggering.
And who won?
The Soviets. They surrounded the German Sixth Army, forced them to surrender. Massive turning point. The beginning of Germany's retreat from the East.
So we've got the Battle of Britain, Stalingrad. Any others that really stand out?
Oh, definitely. D-Day. June 6th, 1944, the Allied invasion of Normandy.
D-Day. Biggest amphibious invasion ever. Seemed like it could have gone so wrong.
It could have. The planning was insanely complex, the risks enormous, but they pulled it off, got a foothold in France, opened up that second front in Europe.
Those soldiers storming the beaches. Unbelievable courage.
It was. D-Day, it was courage, logistics, pure determination, a major turning point. Led to the liberation of France and the final push towards Germany.
So Battle of Britain, Stalingrad, D-Day. 3 turning points that shifted things to the Ally side. It's amazing how these specific battles changed the course of history. What next? What happens from here?
From there, the Allies pushed on, eventually brought the war to a close. But the end, well, it had its own set of challenges, controversies.
This is all so fascinating. I'm ready to hear about how it all ended, the legacy of the war left behind. So we left off with the Allies gaining the upper hand. How did World War II actually end? What were those final steps that brought this global conflict to a close?
Well, by 1945, Germany was, it was on the verge of collapse.
Yeah.
Years of constant fighting, plus the Allied bombing campaigns, it just crippled their industry, their infrastructure,
So it
everything.
wasn't just about winning individual battles, it was about, like, breaking their ability to fight at all.
Exactly. The Allies were advancing from both sides, east and west, just squeezing Germany. And inside Germany, civilian morale was, well, it was in the dumps. That whole promise of what was it, 1,000-year Reich?
Yeah.
It turned into a nightmare, destruction, defeat.
And Hitler. What happened to him in those final days?
As the Soviets were fighting their way into Berlin, April 1945, Hitler, he retreated into his bunker underground. He knew it was over, captured, defeat. So he chose suicide.
Grim end for a man who caused so much suffering.
Yeah. With Hitler gone, German resistance crumbled pretty quickly. The war in Europe officially ended May 8th, 1945. VE Day, victory in Europe.
But the war wasn't over, right? Japan was still fighting?
Right. The Pacific, that was a whole other challenge. Huge distances, fighting on these remote islands. The U.S., they took the brunt of Japan's aggression, and they were determined to win, decisively.
And wasn't that when the atomic bomb, that terrifying new weapon, was introduced?
Yes. August 1945, the U.S. made the decision to drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The destruction was, well, like nothing anyone had ever seen. Hundreds of thousands killed instantly, and many more would die later from radiation.
Horrific. Even if the goal was to end the war quickly, it must have been a shock to the whole world.
Absolutely, it changed everything. The atomic bomb, it ushered in the nuclear age, changed the nature of war forever.
So did that force Japan to surrender?
Yes. Shortly after the bombings, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's unconditional surrender, and that was the end of World War II.
September 2nd, 1945. The end of one of the most devastating conflicts in human history.
It's a date to remember, to celebrate the victory, the sacrifices made for freedom, but also to reflect on the cost. The millions lost, the destruction, the scars it left behind.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main things we should take away from all of this?
World War II has so many lessons, some obvious, some more subtle. We see the dangers of unchecked ambition, how seductive a hateful ideology can be, what happens when you appease aggression. But we also see the power of resilience, the importance of standing up for what's right, even when things are darkest.
Earlier, you mentioned how the Treaty of Versailles maybe it helped create the conditions for Hitler's rise, the war itself. Are there other what-if questions historians still talk about?
Tons. Some say if the Western powers had stepped in sooner, stopped Hitler's expansion, maybe the war could have been avoided. Others say the real conflict was communism versus capitalism, that a clash was bound to happen.
So even now, all these years later, there are still so many questions about World War II.
It's a reminder that history isn't a simple story. It's messy, full of events, choices, consequences, and it's something we have to keep studying, learning from, if we want to avoid repeating the mistakes.
This has been a really an eye-opening deep dive. We've covered so much, from Hitler's rise to the Holocaust, those pivotal battles, the war's ending.
Yeah, it's a lot. And while we focus on the big picture, it's important to remember that everyone who lived through this war, they had their own story.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So to our listeners, keep exploring this period in history. Seek out those individual stories. They can teach us so much about courage, resilience, the human spirit.
Understanding the past is key to building a better future. Let's use the lessons of World War II to create a world of peace, tolerance, and understanding.